Welcome back to part 6 of my oddly specific interior design series. If you're new here, my name is Medora and I make videos about actually realistic home design for the average person. And if you're not new here, yes, I promise I am finally going on tour soon. I just had to keep pushing it back for a variety of reasons. So, some of the next videos you see of me, I will be on tour. If you don't know what I'm talking about, this is your last chance to apply to win a makeover. And I already feel like I have enough, so I'm really only gonna think about taking on like small one-room free makeovers. So if you're interested in that, the link is down below. And without further ado, let's get into my oddly specific interior design yums. Okay, so this first one, if you're doing any sort of open shelving, don't do anything that looks like it came from 2010's Pinterest. Anything that looks vaguely like this. Instead, make it look built in by painting it the same color as the wall, or do some sort of like beautiful wood with floating hardware. Because like brackets and shelves tend to look visually kind of messy, unless you're specifically doing like an older, vintage, antique, historical kind of style. And ideally, the shelf should be no more than like 1 or 2 inches deeper than the things you'll be putting on the shelf. Because I really don't want there to be like extra space behind, so it feels like there's wasted space. I don't want there to be like different layers of things. Like sometimes layering is good, but it really only works in specific contexts, and sometimes it just feels cluttered. So just like display the one bowl you want to display without trying to like style it with a bunch of other things and like put all of your things out on display. I would so much rather you have like a box or a section of a closet that's dedicated specifically to decor that you like rotate through every once in a while, because that way you can switch up all of your stuff when it's starting to feel a little like stale and outdated, but you also don't have to buy a ton of new stuff, and you can kind of just like pick something up whenever both you and your wallet are feeling it. And then also your space can look cleaner and more high-end and curated and less cluttered. Now, like I've said in the past, everyone has their own personal threshold for the amount of things that are physically surrounding you, so you gotta find that balance for yourself. But to some extent, everyone will need some blank space and some stuff. You don't want an empty room. You don't want to be a hoarder. Like, find where you are in between that. One thing I've really been loving recently is rugs that don't have perfectly straight edges. Like, it's a rectangular rug. The edges are like supposed to be straight, but because of like the handmade nature of the item, there's just like a little bit of a curve in there, a little bit of like things have shifted, and I love that. You cannot get that with mass manufactured polyester rugs, because those rugs are made on these giant looms and it's all done by machines, and I've definitely personally been feeling very anti-machine lately. Kind of in a similar vein, I'm very into anything that is in the style of lino cut or sgraffito. Again, something about it just feels very like earthy and handmade and raw. Like, it's very easy to look at these kinds of things and see the process of making the thing. You can see where the clay here was like scraped away. You can like see in, say for example, like a lino cut or a wood block or anything like that, you can see the process of carving away the wood or the linoleum. So I have very specifically been loving lino cut and sgraffito, but kind of more broadly, anything that invokes this sense of process. The next thing I've really been loving is bent wood, or kind of just plywood in general, which that part is not very oddly specific, but I've been in the process of making a top for this dresser over here because I pulled it out of a dumpster and it just didn't have a top to it. And I've really been enjoying the process of like edge banding it and sanding it all down and staining it. It's like relatively simple, basic woodworking, but it's like, it's not complicated in the way that other woodworking I've tried to do is. Although I suppose that's probably just because I'm making one flat surface to just set on top of here. I'm not like doing anything else, but it's the kind of thing that feels like it gives a pretty like professional finished product for like relatively low effort. And I'll pop some pictures up here of like bent wood and plywood and different things that I've been really into recently. Okay, here's one I do not hear talked about enough, and that is paint placement. Because like the color that you're painting a wall or a ceiling or whatever is definitely important, but what's significantly more important in my opinion is where you're placing that paint. Are you using that paint to like bring out architectural details? Are you using that paint just on the flat wall? Are you using paint on the ceiling? Are you going to have the ceiling painted but then also have like a 5-inch strip around the entire room of the ceiling color? Are you going to paint like a little border? Are you going to paint a mural? Like, there are so many options when it comes to paint. Because okay, let's take an example. You could paint the back wall, you could paint the side wall, You could do just like one accent wall, but also please don't. You could do just the trim and molding. You could do just the ceiling. You could do the ceiling and the trim and molding. You could do inside the window frames. You could even paint the floor if you have like old hardwood floors and you're, not renting. So I definitely think that the placement of your paint is much more important than what color you pick. This next one, I think I actually have some examples down here, so hold on. I've really been loving recently square candles. So just any sort of candle that is in a squarish shape like this. We've got this one, and this is battery powered, but still big square pillar candle vibes. And then this one is not quite square, it's more diamond shaped, or rhombus if you're being a math nerd. And I really love these because they feel very monolithic and brutalist in a way that just feels like fun and modern to me rather than like imperialist. So I like square candles. My next oddly specific design yum is that I really love proportions and ratios that are wider than they are tall. So this applies to lamps, this applies to dressers, this applies to ovens, this applies to dining room tables, this applies to nightstands. Like, it pretty much applies to everything. And I think the reason that is because it's definitely a signifier of wealth. Like, if you can afford the space to fit a really large desk in, that's a signifier of wealth. If you can afford to live somewhere that has like 4, 5, 6 feet of width for a kitchen range, that's a signifier of wealth. And that's not to say that these things are inherently bad just because they're a signifier of wealth, but generally speaking, I do like them more, and I also want to acknowledge that. Now, this next one is kind of similar, kind of opposite, but I really like mid-century design where you have a long, skinny little window across the top of your wall. And I also love a tall, skinny window that's like just supposed to let in light, but it's not the type of window that you're supposed to like put curtains on. And just in general, I really love like a weird window. So whether that's a window in a little alcove and you like build it out and it's a cute little reading nook or something, or I love a circular window or a triangular window or a stained glass window or anything that's like a weird funky shape that's like generally just a really cool architectural detail. Again, also very much a signifier of wealth. But more than that, to me, it's a signifier of creativity. Like, especially in spaces where like people have built their own home. I really love seeing the creativity that people can put into like thinking about the architecture of the space and thinking outside the box instead of just like putting up some walls, putting some like normal boring ass windows in there and calling it a day. Because homes can be so much cooler if we let them. And that starts with the architecture. The next two are kind of related. They're both about curtains. And the first one is using curtains in some sort of creative way that like doesn't involve windows. Because normally when we think about curtains, we think about putting curtains up over your windows. Cool. Okay. Where else can we put big flowy drapey fabric? Because big flowy drapey fabric is objectively cool. Again, a signifier of wealth, but objectively cool. So, can you use a curtain as a closet door? Can you use a curtain as a room divider? Can you use a curtain to hide clutter? Can you use it as a headboard? Can you use it as a wall covering? Can you use it as a canopy bed? Like, there are so many ways to use curtains, and that's not even getting into like sink skirts and under the counter curtains and stuff like that. So again, I think more than the curtains, what I'm really drawn to here is the creativity. You can bring creativity into your home in so many different ways, and big pieces of random fabric just kind of happen to be a good way to do that. Okay, the second one that is kind of related to this, because I'll be talking about curtains, but can really be applied to anywhere in your home, and this is probably the most oddly specific thing on this list because it is curtains or whatever else that are custom sized to specifically fit your exact dimensions. Like, there is something so satisfying about curtains that are like hung perfectly so they have like a 1/4 inch of clearance all the way across, or like bamboo shades or Roman blinds that fit perfectly within the inside of the window frame. Like, that is just so satisfying. And sometimes you just have a weird space and you need a specific size, and you're literally never going to be able to find a prefabricated curtain panel that's 78 inches wide by 93 inches tall, which is what we need for a curtain panel downstairs in my girlfriend's house to cover these giant windows. Now, thankfully, 2Pages gifted me some curtains to fix that, and I am really excited to show you these because they are by far the nicest curtains I have ever had in my entire life. Now, we're not going to do an unboxing or anything because I did have to open the box to make sure that everything they sent was correct and whatnot, but I haven't actually installed them yet as of the time of filming this, so we're gonna let VoiceOver Medora, aka Medora in the future, Medora after I have installed these curtains. We're gonna let that Medora tell you more specifically about these curtains while I hang them up, because from what I've seen so far, I am rather happy, but let's let future Medora confirm that. This is VoiceOver Medora popping in to say that not only are these curtains as good as I expected, they are better. 2Pages didn't give me a script or tell me to say any sort of specific things. They literally just told me to talk about my honest opinions. So, my genuine opinions are that these are really nice curtains. And I didn't even get the nicest fabric. Like, this is the polyester fabric. Based on what I know about fabrics, their linen fabrics and their cotton fabrics should be an even nicer drape than this, but like, this is already so good. Like, I knew they were going to be good, but I didn't know that they were going to be this good. I wasn't aware just how much curtains could make me feel like an adult who actually kind of has my shit together. It is kind of hard to get good photos and videos of these because it's all backlit and there are multiple neighbors' houses outside, and you know, for safety reasons, I don't really want to show those and accidentally dox myself. It's kind of like photographing a sunset or a sunrise or the moon or something like that. Like, genuinely, I'm not trying to be dramatic, but the photos and videos I've taken of this do not even come close to doing these curtains justice. To get this look, we hung the curtains about an inch from the ceiling, like with just enough space to be able to get the curtain rods in there. And speaking of curtain rods, spoiler, these are not real curtain rods. I literally just used some cheap conduit from my local home improvement store, and I spray painted it with this like hammered effect spray paint, and then I stuck a smaller little random piece of pipe inside the two of them, and I was initially thinking of using rubber bands to like wrap around the smaller piece so that it would fit inside of the other two pipes and like the grippiness would hold it all together, but we couldn't end up finding any rubber bands, so we ended up using hockey tape, and that worked perfectly. And then for the finials, we just used some little like plastic PVC end cap things that we found in like probably the plumbing section. Like, we were just kind of hodgepodging together some random stuff, and it turned out so good. It really was not that complicated, even though we were like DIYing the entire curtain rod situation by ourselves, because I was not about to spend hundreds of dollars on a curtain rod that spans 13 feet. Also, if you notice the like 2 wrinkles that are in these curtains, if you've paid attention to any other 2Pages ads from influencers and stuff, you'll know that they are supposed to be wrinkle-free. But these curtains were sitting scrunched up in a box for a month before I hung them up. I didn't steam them, I didn't iron them, and if you know anything about cheaper curtains or making your own curtains, some fabrics wrinkle so badly. And I may or may not have first-hand experience with this, making some curtains for the RV I lived in a few years ago, and I ironed the shit out of those curtains, and those wrinkles just would not come out. But these have virtually no wrinkles to begin with, and I am quite happy about that. All in all, I am so glad that we decided to get curtains for here, partially because it makes the space feel more grand. It makes the ceilings feel taller, because with these really dark ceiling fans, the ceilings were starting to feel very short, but having a long line extending beyond the ceiling fans all the way up to the ceiling, it genuinely makes the space feel bigger. Like, this is just one of those things that I feel like is such a good example of perfect design. It's beautiful, obviously. It genuinely improves how it feels to be in the space. And also, they're going to be so functional because we get a lot of sun during the summer through these windows, and thankfully I had the foresight to think to order thermal curtains. So not only will we be able to block out the sunlight during the summer so it, you know, doesn't get too hot in here, but also we live in Minnesota, and these doors are on a north-facing wall, which, if you know anything about passive solar design, is really bad design. So they'll also be a massive help in the winter to keep the heat inside. And as I was, you know, sitting on my couch trying to type up ideas for this voiceover script earlier, I was literally getting so distracted because I couldn't stop staring at the curtains. So if you never want to get any work done ever again because you're too distracted by how pretty your home is, get these curtains. And if you do, please use the link in the description and also code MEDORAKIA for 20% off, because trust me, that 20% really adds up when you're talking about like $500, $1,000+ of custom curtains. Now again, this obviously extends beyond just curtains, but anything that is custom made for your specific space that like fits perfectly into the space, whether you paid someone else to make it or you DIY'd it yourself, is always, always a big win for me. Okay, this next oddly specific design yum is this very specific type of border, and I have no idea what it's called. I'll try to like do a little bit of research and find some other example images here, but I really love a square or a rectangle where the corners are little squares that go inwards. I don't know why I love this. I think it's just that it's a little intentional detail that makes it so much more interesting than like your average square or rectangle, even though they're all the same shapes. Like they're all very simple, achievable shapes, but like just that little extra bit of thought and intention is really interesting to me. So, and then also I didn't really have this on this list, but art that like references something that's important to you without being like very obviously the thing, I'm a big fan of. So this specific art reminds me of like cell cultures and mitosis and meiosis and high school biology class. And I'm specifically talking more about like nerdy and geeky things here. Like I love things that have a personal backstory to them. I love things that are meaningful, but also let's just like curate the space so it actually like all works together and makes sense. So for a very oddly specific example, say you have a Star Wars poster from one of your favorite high school teachers that is really meaningful to you, but also you don't necessarily want to like have a Star Wars poster in your space. Figure out a really nice way to frame it, figure out a really nice way to style it, stuff like that. Okay, I'm gonna put this next one in my unpopular design opinions because I don't think that this is actually oddly specific. I think it's more of an unpopular opinion. So if you want to see that video when it comes out, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe and do all the YouTubey things to tell the algorithm to show you more of my videos. And now for the last couple things, I know I've talked a lot about unique patterns that are a combination of like checks and stripes and plaid and all of that, but even more than that, I very specifically love when these patterns, or any other patterns in general, are actually made with colored threads that are woven through the fabric in this pattern, instead of being like printed on top of the fabric, because that just never looks good, at least in my opinion. Because like the whole point of printing on fabric for the most part is to use a cheaper fabric. And a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times, fabric where the design is woven into the fabric is much higher quality. And again, like we talked about before, this really invokes the process. So big fan of anything that invokes the process. This next one I probably should have included at the beginning with lino cuts and sgraffito, but lithographs, it's not quite the same style, but it's another word to use that you can use to search to find art that is oftentimes very cool. There is a whole process to lithographs that I don't fully understand. But again, it's very labor intensive, and like with so many things on this list, it invokes the process. So even if you can't afford like an original, even just getting a print of a lithograph is still preferable in my opinion to getting some like mass manufactured stuff from IKEA. Okay, last but not least is things that have multiple functions. And I'm not necessarily talking about those coffee tables that like lift up to become a dining table and they also have storage in them. Like that's one version, but also usually those don't actually lift up high enough and they're just like not quite. Anyways, I may or may not have a personal vendetta against those types of coffee tables. But when I say multiple functions, I mean something more along the lines of a thick wool rug that's insulating, it's made out of wool so it's hypoallergenic, and it doesn't stain as easily, making sure it's correctly sized for your space so that you can like energetically and visually divide the spaces, and also just something that's beautiful, because beauty is very much a function. And I feel like we tend to forget that because there's kind of this like cultural mindset that anything arts related is somehow less important than like math and science. But that's because this country tends to prioritize the military, and so that's what we're all brainwashed with as kids, but that's maybe a topic for a different video. So if you like this video and you want to see more like it, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to tell the algorithm to show you more of my videos. If you want to win a makeover while I go on tour this summer, this is your last chance. The link will be down below. Make sure to get it in by, oh, I don't know, let's say May 15th. Let's just say the middle of May. If you want to get access to community calls and also early ad-free videos as a way of supporting this channel and allowing me to go do makeovers for people, head over to patreon.com/medorakia. And if you want to work with me one-on-one, go to medorakia.com. Bye.
Wait, you didn't do the classic check to make sure it works.